Part 1. The Silent Stones Speak. Stonehenge, a name that whispers across millennia, evoking images of druids, ancient rituals, and astronomical alignments. For centuries, we've gazed upon these colossal stones, marveling at their imposing presence on the Salisbury Plain. We've meticulously measured, mapped, and theorized. We've debated their purpose, their builders, their significance. We've built narratives around solstice celebrations, burial grounds, and prehistoric observatories. Yet, beneath the surface of accepted theories, a deeper, more enigmatic possibility lies dormant. What if Stonehenge, and other megalithic sites scattered across the globe, were not isolated monuments, but rather interconnected nodes in a forgotten, planetary-wide energy network? A network designed to harness and distribute a power source we are only beginning to understand. The conventional archaeological narrative tells a story of Neolithic ingenuity, of a people driven by religious fervor and a profound connection to the celestial cycles. And while these factors undoubtedly played a role, perhaps they only tell part of the story. Perhaps the true purpose of Stonehenge, and its brethren across continents, lies beyond the realm of simple ritual. The sheer scale of the undertaking, the quarrying, the transportation, the precision placement of these multi-ton stones, suggests a driving force far beyond what we currently attribute to Neolithic societies. Could it be that their understanding of the natural world extended far beyond what we give them credit for? Could they have possessed a knowledge of earth energies, telluric currents, and a technology for manipulating these forces that we, in our modern hubris, have overlooked? Consider the placement of Stonehenge. It's not situated randomly. It rests upon a confluence of underground water streams, a geological feature known to exhibit unusual electromagnetic properties. Could this be mere coincidence? Or is it a clue, a subtle hint pointing towards a deeper understanding of the site's true function? Many other megalithic structures around the world share this characteristic. They are positioned on geologically active areas, places where the Earth's energy seems to be particularly potent. From the Carnac stones in France to the Avebury-Henge complex, from the pyramids of Giza to the Nazca lines in Peru, these ancient sites often align with fault lines, volcanic zones, or areas rich in mineral deposits. Is it conceivable that these locations were chosen not for their aesthetic appeal, but for their energetic properties? That these ancient builders were, in essence, tapping into the Earth's natural energy grid? Let's delve deeper into the stones themselves. The bluestones of Stonehenge, transported from the Preseli Hills in Wales, over 150 miles away, are not just any rocks. They are dolerite, a type of igneous rock known for its piezoelectric properties, the ability to generate an electrical charge under pressure. Imagine the immense pressure exerted on these stones during their transportation and erection. Could this have been part of the plan, a deliberate act to activate these piezoelectric properties? Could the very act of constructing Stonehenge have been part of the process of charging this ancient energy system? And what of the sarsen stones, the massive sandstone blocks that form the iconic outer circle? Their sheer size and arrangement suggest something beyond mere symbolism. Could they have acted as resonators, amplifying the energy generated by the bluestones? Could the entire structure have functioned as a giant, sophisticated energy receiver and transmitter, capable of channeling and distributing Earth energies across vast distances? The idea may seem far-fetched, yet when we examine the evidence through a new lens, a lens unburdened by conventional assumptions, the possibility begins to take shape. The precision with which these stones were placed, the astronomical alignments, the intricate geometry of the overall design, all these factors hint at a deeper understanding of natural forces, a knowledge that transcends our current understanding of Neolithic capabilities. Could it be that these ancient builders understood principles of energy manipulation that we are only beginning to rediscover? Could they have harnessed the Earth's natural energy field for purposes we can only speculate about, for communication, for healing, for powering their civilizations in ways we can scarcely imagine? The silent stones of Stonehenge hold secrets. They whisper of a forgotten past, a time when humanity's relationship with the Earth was perhaps more profound, more interconnected than we realize. As we continue to explore these ancient mysteries, we must remain open to the possibility that the true purpose of Stonehenge, and its counterparts around the world, may be far more extraordinary than we have ever dared to imagine. The idea of a global energy network, powered by the Earth itself and orchestrated by a civilization lost to time, may seem like science fiction. But perhaps, the science of the future will reveal that our ancestors knew more than we give them credit for. Perhaps, the stones are waiting for us to rediscover their secrets, to unlock the knowledge they hold, and to reconnect with a forgotten source of power. The helicopter dipped lower, the roar of its blades a frantic insect buzzing against the unnatural silence that blanketed Salisbury Plain. Below, Stonehenge stood sentinel, its ancient stones radiating an unsettling stillness that seemed to absorb sound. Professor Armitage, his face pale beneath his wind-whipped gray hair, pointed a trembling finger towards a specific point within the circle. There, that's where the readings spiked. Right at the heel stone. The helicopter landed a safe distance away, its arrival a sacrilegious intrusion. The team disembarked, their faces grim, each step crunching on the frost-kissed grass a stark reminder of the encroaching, unnatural winter. The biting cold seemed to leach the very warmth from their bones, clinging to them like a spectral shroud. As they approached the henge, the Geiger counter in Armitage's hand began to chatter with increasing urgency. The air crackled with an invisible energy, a palpable tension that prickled the skin. The familiar stones, once symbols of ancient mystery, now pulsated with a malevolent energy, their weathered surfaces seeming to shift and writhe in their peripheral vision. The readings are off the charts, Dr. Chen, the team's physicist, whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and terror. This shouldn't be possible. They reached the heel stone, a solitary monolith standing just outside the main circle. It was here, at the supposed entrance to this prehistoric monument, that the anomaly was at its strongest. The stone itself seemed to vibrate with a low hum, a resonance that resonated deep within their chests, an almost physical pressure. Armitage knelt, his hand hovering just above the weathered surface. He hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "It feels warm," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the insistent clicking of the Geiger counter. He touched the stone. The world exploded in a blinding white light. When their vision cleared, Stonehenge remained, but subtly different. The stones seemed sharper, more defined, the air thrumming with a newfound intensity. The sky above, once a clear, cold blue, was now tinged with a sickly green hue, the color of a bruised plum. The temperature plummeted further, the biting cold intensified, and the wind howled like a banshee released from its prison. What happened?" Dr. Chen stammered, her eyes wide with fear. Armitage, still kneeling, his hand pressed against the heel stone, looked up, his face etched with a dawning horror. I think we just activated it." Over the next few days, the strangeness intensified. The abnormal cold spread, creeping outwards from Stonehenge like a malignant growth. Reports of unusual phenomena flooded in from around the globe. Strange lights in the sky, unexplained power outages, animals behaving erratically, whispers of ancient rituals resurfaced in remote communities. The world seemed to be holding its breath, teetering on the precipice of something unknown, something terrifying. Back at Stonehenge, Armitage and his team worked tirelessly, poring over ancient texts, desperately trying to understand what they had unleashed. They discovered that Stonehenge wasn't just a monument, it was a key, a linchpin in a global network of similar structures, each strategically placed across the planet, each pulsating with the same unsettling energy. They learned that these structures were not built by humans, not entirely. They were built with humans, guided by an ancient, otherworldly intelligence, an entity that promised power and knowledge in exchange for something. The text spoke of a celestial alignment, a convergence of cosmic energies that would awaken this entity, an event that these structures were designed to facilitate. An event that Armitage and his team had inadvertently triggered. The green tinge in the sky deepened, spreading like a contagious disease. The sun, a pale, ghostly disk, seemed to weaken with each passing day. The world descended into an unnatural twilight, a perpetual state of dusk that fueled the growing sense of dread. Then came the dreams. Vivid, terrifying dreams that plagued not just the team at Stonehenge, but people across the globe. Dreams of a vast, swirling darkness, a cosmic entity of unimaginable size and power, its presence felt as a suffocating weight on their souls. Dreams of sacrifices, of ancient rituals performed under a sickly green sky, of a world reshaped in the image of this otherworldly horror. Armitage knew, with a chilling certainty, that time was running out. The convergence was approaching. The entity was awakening, and humanity, unknowingly, had paved the way for its arrival. He looked at the heel stone, now radiating a malevolent green glow, and a single thought echoed in his mind, a terrifying whisper in the gathering darkness. What have we done? What if Stonehenge was part of a global energy network? Part 3. The rhythmic thrumming grew stronger. It resonated not just through the earth, but seemed to vibrate within my very bones. Sleep became a distant memory, punctuated by vivid, disturbing dreams of cyclopean structures and swirling, cosmic energies. Dr. Albright, however, seemed invigorated, almost manic. His eyes, usually clouded with academic fatigue, now burned with an unsettling intensity. He barely ate, surviving on black coffee and scribbled equations that resembled a madman's ramblings more than scientific notes. The resonance, it's increasing exponentially, he muttered one morning, his voice hoarse. He traced a shaking finger across a map of the world, dotted with pins marking locations like Easter Island, the Nazca Lines, and the pyramids of Giza. They're all reacting, waking up. My skepticism was eroding, replaced by a creeping dread. The air itself felt charged, heavy with an unseen energy. Strange atmospheric phenomena became commonplace. Auroras shimmering in the daytime sky, shimmering heat hazes in the dead of night, and a pervasive, low hum that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. The animals, too, were acting strangely. Birds flew in erratic patterns, their cries sharp and frantic. The sheep in the surrounding fields huddled together, bleating nervously, their eyes wide with terror. One evening, under a sky pulsating with ethereal green light, Albright insisted we return to Stonehenge. The thrumming was now a constant, physical pressure against my eardrums. As we approached the ancient circle, a low, guttural chant rose from within. A group of people, clad in dark robes, stood within the circle. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but their movements were synchronized, their arms raised towards the central altar stone. Albright gripped my arm, his fingernails digging into my flesh. They're channeling the energy, he whispered, his voice awash with a mixture of awe and terror. They're activating it. The chanting intensified, the ground beneath our feet trembling. The stones began to glow with an otherworldly light, pulsating in time with the chanting. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I stumbled back, pulling Albright with me. We have to stop them, I gasped, but Albright seemed transfixed, his eyes glued to the spectacle unfolding before us. No, we have to observe. We have to understand. Suddenly, the chanting ceased. A silence descended, so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. The stones continued to glow, their light now a blinding white. Then, a beam of pure energy shot skyward from the central altar stone, a searing column of light that pierced the swirling aurora. The ground shook violently. I fell to my knees, my ears ringing. Albright cried out, a strangled gasp of both terror and exhilaration. When the light subsided, the robed figures were gone. The stones stood silent, their glow fading, but the air still crackled with residual energy. Albright was on his feet, his face pale, his eyes wide with a terrifying understanding. It's begun, he whispered, his voice trembling. The network, it's active. Over the next few days, the world began to change. The strange atmospheric phenomena intensified. Earthquakes rocked previously stable regions. Reports of strange sightings flooded the news, unexplained lights in the sky, bizarre creatures emerging from the depths of the oceans, and whispers of ancient rituals being performed in forgotten corners of the world. Albright became increasingly withdrawn, spending all his time poring over his notes and making frantic calculations. He spoke of a coming convergence, a point where the energies channeled through the network would reach a critical mass, triggering a transformation of unimaginable proportions. He refused to elaborate, but his fear, his utter terror, was palpable. I tried to contact the authorities, to warn them of what was happening, but my pleas were met with disbelief and ridicule. I was dismissed as a hysterical academic, caught up in Albright's delusional fantasies. Then came the dreams, not my own, but Albright's. He would scream in his sleep, tormented by visions of monstrous entities and landscapes twisted beyond recognition. He would wake up in a cold sweat, muttering about the Great Ones and their imminent arrival. One morning, I found him gone. His room was empty, his notes scattered across the floor. The only thing left was a single sheet of paper, covered in his frantic scrawl. It contained a single, chilling sentence. "They are coming through the gates." I looked out the window. The sky was a swirling vortex of colors I had never seen before. The ground trembled beneath my feet. In the distance, I could hear a low, resonant hum, growing louder with each passing second. It was the sound of the network, fully activated, opening the way for something beyond human comprehension. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the world was about to end. What if Stonehenge was part of a global energy network? Part 4 of 25. The droning returned, deeper this time, resonating not just in my ears but in the very marrow of my bones. The wind picked up, whipping around us in a frantic spiral, as if the very air itself was trying to escape the unseen force descending upon Salisbury Plain. The sheep, now reduced to skeletal shadows against the twilight, bleated a chorus of terror, their sound a thin, reedy counterpoint to the ominous hum. Even Professor Armitage, normally a bastion of scientific detachment, seemed shaken. His face, lit by the eerie glow emanating from the stones, was a mask of strained concentration, his lips moving soundlessly as he muttered calculations under his breath. The resonance, it's increasing exponentially, he finally choked out, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. The alignment is almost complete. I didn't need scientific instruments to confirm his observation. The air itself felt charged, crackling with an unseen energy. The standing stones, once inert monoliths, now pulsed with a sickly, internal light, the veins of quartz within them seeming to throb and shimmer. The droning intensified, morphing into a deep, rhythmic pulsation that seemed to synchronize with my own heartbeat. I felt a strange pull towards the center of the circle, a dizzying compulsion I fought with every fiber of my being. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Now. Armitage didn't respond. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the largest trilithon, the one directly aligned with the setting sun. The pulsing light emanating from it intensified, bathing the surrounding stones in a blinding white glare. I reached out to grab his arm, to pull him away from the mesmerizing spectacle, but he flinched away as if my touch burned him. "Don't interrupt," he hissed, his voice strained and unnatural. It's communicating." Communicating? With what? The thought sent a shiver down my spine colder than the biting wind. I looked around frantically, half expecting to see some monstrous entity emerge from the shadows, drawn by the growing energy of the stones. But there was nothing, just the wind, the sheep, and the increasingly oppressive presence of the stones themselves. Then, the ground began to tremble. The tremor started subtly, a barely perceptible vibration underfoot. But it quickly escalated, growing stronger with each pulsation of the stones. The sheep, their bleating now reaching a fever pitch, stampeded in blind panic, their skeletal forms disappearing into the swirling dust and shadows. The ground beneath us buckled and heaved, cracks appearing in the parched earth like lightning strikes. Armitage, still entranced, remained rooted to the spot, his eyes fixated on the pulsing trilithon. I grabbed him again, this time with more force, and dragged him stumbling away from the center of the circle. "We have to get out of here," I yelled over the rising cacophony of the wind, the groaning earth, and the pulsating drone. He finally seemed to register my presence, his eyes flickering with a momentary spark of recognition. He allowed himself to be pulled along, though his movements were sluggish, as if he were wading through thick mud. We stumbled across the uneven ground, the tremors now violent enough to send us sprawling more than once. As we reached the perimeter of the circle, a blinding flash of light erupted from the center, followed by a deafening roar. I shielded my eyes, instinctively ducking my head against the onslaught of energy. The ground beneath us lurched violently, throwing me off my feet. I landed hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. When I finally managed to look up, I gasped. The central trilithon, the focal point of the energy, had vanished. In its place was a swirling vortex of light, a pulsating, incandescent column that reached up into the darkening sky. The surrounding stones, bathed in its unnatural glow, seemed to vibrate with an almost tangible energy. The droning had ceased, replaced by a high-pitched whine that pierced my eardrums. Armitage, lying a few feet away, stared at the vortex with an expression of awe mixed with terror. He reached a trembling hand towards it, as if drawn by an irresistible force. It's opened, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the whine. The gateway? A gateway? To what? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the vortex of light pulsed and shimmered, a beacon in the gathering darkness. The wind howled around us, carrying a new sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the swirling energy. A primal fear, unlike anything I had ever experienced, gripped me, cold and suffocating. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever lay beyond that gateway was something ancient, something powerful, and something undeniably malevolent. And it was calling. What if Stonehenge was part of a global energy network? Part 5 of 25. The silence that descended after the humming ceased was more terrifying than the sound itself. It was the silence of held breath, of a predator pausing before the kill. The air, thick with ozone, crackled with an unseen energy, clinging to us like cobwebs. Amelia, bless her soul, was trying to be brave, but her trembling hands and wide, unblinking eyes betrayed her fear. We were standing in the center of the now activated Stonehenge, surrounded by the towering stones that pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. The sky, a bruised purple, seemed to press down on us, heavy with the weight of the unknown. Professor Armitage, his face etched with a disturbing mixture of awe and terror, was muttering to himself, flipping frantically through his notes. He looked older, gaunter, as if the last few hours had aged him a decade. It's resonating, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The other sites, they're responding. He pointed a shaking finger towards the small, portable monitor he'd set up on a tripod. The screen displayed a world map, overlaid with a network of pulsating lines connecting various points across the globe. Each point corresponded to a megalithic site: Easter Island, the Nazca Lines, the Pyramids of Giza. They were all glowing, throbbing in unison with Stonehenge, like nodes in a vast, awakening nervous system. The energy, it's flowing, Amelia breathed, her voice barely a whisper. A low, guttural growl resonated from deep within the earth, sending a tremor through the very ground beneath our feet. It was a sound that defied explanation, a primal sound that spoke of something ancient and immensely powerful stirring from its age-long slumber. The pulsing of the stones intensified, the light within them growing brighter, casting eerie, dancing shadows across the surrounding plain. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. The instinctive, primal fear that had been gnawing at the edges of my sanity was now a full-blown panic. This wasn't a scientific breakthrough, it was a summoning, an awakening of something that should have remained undisturbed. Professor Armitage seemed oblivious to my plea. He was lost in a feverish scrutiny of his monitor, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. It's working, my theory, it's all true. They are connected, a global energy network, unimaginable power. Another growl, deeper and more resonant than the last, shook the earth, sending a wave of nausea through me. The stones now pulsed with a blinding light, and the air crackled with so much energy that I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Professor, we need to leave, now. Amelia pleaded, tugging at his arm. He brushed her off, his eyes fixated on the screen. Don't you understand? This is the most important discovery in human history. We are on the verge of unlocking unlimited power. The ground began to tremble violently. Cracks appeared in the earth around us, snaking towards the stones like hungry serpents. The sky, now a swirling vortex of purple and black, seemed to be descending, pressing down on us with suffocating weight. Suddenly, the monitor went blank. The humming stopped. The light within the stones faded, leaving us in an unnerving, flickering twilight. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than before. It was the silence of anticipation, of something waiting, watching. Then, it began. A low, rhythmic chanting, seemingly emanating from the very stones themselves, filled the air. It was a language I didn't understand, yet it resonated deep within my bones, evoking a chilling sense of dread. The chanting grew louder, joined by other voices, a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from all directions, from the earth, the sky, from the very air we breathed. Amelia screamed. I spun around, searching for the source of the voices, but there was nothing there. Just the stones, standing silent and ominous against the darkening sky. Professor Armitage was on his knees, his hands clasped over his ears, his face a mask of terror. It's calling them," he stammered, his voice barely audible above the rising crescendo of whispers. "The guardians, they're coming." The ground beneath us heaved, and a gaping fissure opened up just a few feet away. A foul, sulphurous smell billowed from the depths, accompanied by a wave of intense heat. From the darkness within the fissure, a pair of glowing red eyes emerged, followed by another, and another, until dozens of them were staring out at us, burning with malevolent intent. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, creatures of nightmare, with twisted, humanoid forms and skin like polished obsidian. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and their mouths were filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The chanting intensified, and the creatures began to emerge from the fissure, their movements slow and deliberate, like predators stalking their prey. We were trapped, surrounded by these things. Professor Armitage, still on his knees, looked up at me, his eyes filled with a horrifying mixture of fear and resignation. We shouldn't have woken them," he whispered. As the creatures advanced, their chanting growing louder, I knew, with chilling certainty, that he was right. We had unleashed something ancient and terrible upon the world, something that should have remained forever dormant. And now, we were about to pay the price. What if Stonehenge was part of a global energy network? Part 6. The glyphs swam before Eleanor's eyes, a chaotic dance of angular lines and swirling curves. The throbbing in her skull mirrored the low hum emanating from the stones, a resonance that seemed to burrow deep into her bones. She felt a strange pull, a yearning to touch the weathered surface of the nearest trilithon, but a primal fear held her back. David, however, showed no such hesitation. He reached out, his hand hovering just above the lichen-covered stone. "Don't," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse. He paused, his fingers twitching. "But, I feel drawn to it." "So do I," she admitted, "but it feels wrong." He retracted his hand, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The hum intensified, and the air around them crackled with an invisible energy. The wind picked up, swirling dust and dry leaves around their feet. Eleanor shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. The late afternoon sun, obscured by scudding clouds, cast long, menacing shadows that danced and stretched across the desolate landscape. Suddenly, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving than the noise had been. David and Eleanor exchanged a worried glance. The oppressive atmosphere pressed down on them, thick and suffocating. Eleanor felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Something was about to happen. Then, the earth beneath their feet trembled. A low growl echoed from the center of the circle, growing louder with each passing second. The stones began to vibrate, a low, guttural hum building once again, but this time, it was laced with a palpable sense of menace. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. From the heart of Stonehenge, a shimmering, translucent column of energy erupted skyward. It pulsed and throbbed, casting an eerie, otherworldly glow across the surrounding plains. Eleanor stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The column expanded, reaching higher and higher, until it pierced the cloud cover and vanished into the darkening sky. David stared, transfixed. "It's beautiful," he whispered, his voice awestruck. "No," Eleanor breathed, shaking her head. "It's terrifying." As the energy column stabilized, a network of finer beams began to shoot out from it, arcing across the sky like luminous tentacles. They stretched outwards, reaching towards the horizon, connecting to invisible points in the distance. Eleanor remembered the map she'd seen, the lines connecting Stonehenge to other ancient sites around the globe. This was it. The network was activating. A wave of nausea washed over Eleanor. The air crackled with static, and the metallic taste of ozone filled her mouth. She felt a strange tingling sensation in her skin, as if every cell in her body was vibrating in harmony with the energy emanating from the stones. She looked at David, and saw a similar expression of bewilderment on his face. The wind howled, and the ground trembled again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the earth around the stones, spreading outwards like spiderwebs. Eleanor grabbed David's arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. "We need to get out of here," she yelled, her voice barely audible above the roar of the wind. He nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Together, they stumbled away from the circle, the ground shaking beneath their feet. As they reached the perimeter of the site, they looked back. The energy column pulsed and throbbed, casting an eerie, pulsating light across the landscape. The connecting beams stretched across the sky, a terrifying web of interconnected energy. They ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. They didn't know where they were going, only that they needed to get away from Stonehenge, from the terrifying power that had been unleashed. As they fled, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. She felt a presence, something watching them, something ancient and malevolent. The tingling sensation in her skin intensified, and she realized with a chilling certainty that the energy from Stonehenge wasn't just radiating outwards, it was reaching inwards, touching something deep within her, something primal and unsettling. They ran until they reached the road, their lungs burning, their legs aching. They flagged down a passing car, a young couple on their way to Salisbury. The couple, initially hesitant, agreed to take them to the nearest town. As they drove away, Eleanor looked back at Stonehenge, silhouetted against the darkening sky. The energy column still pulsed, a beacon of otherworldly power. Safe inside the car, Eleanor leaned her head against the window, exhaustion weighing heavily on her. She closed her eyes, but the image of the pulsing column of energy remained burned into her mind. She knew that what she had witnessed at Stonehenge was only the beginning. The network had been activated, and whatever power it held had been unleashed upon the world. And she had a terrifying premonition that this power was not benevolent. It was something ancient, something dark, something that had been waiting for millennia to be awakened. And now, it was awake. What if Stonehenge was part of a global energy network? Part 7. The hum intensified, a bone-deep vibration that resonated not just through the earth, but through us. The standing stones, now glowing an unsettling shade of violet, pulsed with this rhythmic energy, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that danced like specters across the ravaged landscape. Even the air seemed to crackle with static, the scent of ozone sharp in our nostrils. Professor Armitage, his face etched with a mixture of terror and morbid fascination, clung to one of the smaller stones, his knuckles white. It's drawing power," he stammered, his voice barely audible above the growing hum. From somewhere, everywhere, the ground beneath us began to tremble. Fissures, thin and spiderweb-like at first, snaked their way across the chalky soil. A chilling wind whipped through the broken circle of stones, carrying with it whispers that seemed to claw at the edges of our sanity. Whispers in languages we didn't understand, languages that felt ancient, alien. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, was frantically trying to re-establish communication with the outside world, her radio spitting out nothing but static. "Damn it," she hissed, throwing the device to the ground in frustration. "Nothing. We're completely cut off." The violet glow intensified, blindingly bright now. The whispers became louder, coalescing into a chorus of disjointed chanting. The fissures in the ground widened, revealing glimpses of pulsating, luminescent energy deep below. The earth itself seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the hum. Then, from the center of the stone circle, where the altar stone once stood, a pillar of pure violet light erupted. It reached skyward, a terrifying beacon against the darkening sky. As we watched, horrified, similar pillars began to erupt across the horizon. One to the north, another to the west, then two more in the south, all connected by shimmering lines of energy that arced across the sky like a macabre spiderweb. "The network?" Armitage whispered, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of awe and fear. "It's activating." The chanting intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The very air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly power. I felt a strange pull, a sickening sensation of being drawn towards the central pillar of light. It wasn't a physical pull, but something deeper, something that resonated with a primal part of my being I didn't even know existed. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. "Don't," she shouted over the din. "Don't look at it." But it was too late. My gaze was fixed on the pulsating violet light, mesmerized by its raw power. I felt my mind slipping, my sense of self dissolving into the overwhelming energy that permeated the air. I saw flashes of images, fragmented and distorted, scenes of unimaginable horror and alien landscapes that defied comprehension. I saw towering, cyclopean structures reaching towards a swirling, purple sky. I saw grotesque, bioluminescent creatures floating in a subterranean ocean. I saw something else. Something that made my blood run cold, something that I couldn't quite grasp, but that filled me with a primal, instinctive terror. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the vision ended. The light dimmed, the chanting subsided, and the ground stopped shaking. The pillars of light across the horizon flickered and disappeared, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease and the echo of something ancient and malevolent. We stood there, dazed and disoriented, the silence broken only by our ragged breaths. The stones still glowed faintly, a ghostly reminder of the power that had just coursed through them. The air was still thick with ozone, and the whispers, though fainter, still lingered at the edges of our hearing. What was that? I stammered, my voice trembling. Armitage, his face pale and drawn, shook his head slowly. I don't know, he whispered. But I fear we've just witnessed the beginning of something truly terrible. Sarah, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, pointed towards the east. Look, she whispered, her voice barely audible. On the horizon, a dark, amorphous shape was rising. It was vast, blotting out the stars as it ascended, its edges constantly shifting and reforming. It wasn't a cloud, nor was it anything we could comprehend. It was something else. Something alien, something wrong. The whispers returned, louder this time, coalescing into a single, chilling word that echoed across the desolate landscape. Awake. The ground beneath us began to tremble again, not with the rhythmic pulse of before, but with a violent, erratic shaking. Fissures, wider and deeper now, snaked their way towards us, revealing glimpses of the pulsating, violet energy below. The air crackled with an unbearable tension, the scent of ozone now overpowering. We knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever had awakened was not meant for human eyes. And it was coming for us. What if Stonehenge was part of a global energy network? Part 8 of 25. The drone footage flickered on Dr. Anya Sharma's laptop, the gray stones of Stonehenge looming against a bruised, pre-dawn sky. The wind whispered through the feed, a mournful sigh that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. Last night's excavation, a frantic, desperate dig beneath the heelstone, had yielded nothing but more questions. The humming, the resonance, it was gone. Vanished. As if the earth itself had swallowed the sound. Anything? Professor Armitage's voice was rough, laced with fatigue. He hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours, the dark circles under his eyes deepening with each passing, unsettling hour. Anya shook her head, the movement tight and jerky. No. Sensors are picking up background radiation, slightly elevated, but nothing like the focused energy signature we detected before. It's like someone switched it off. Armitage ran a hand through his thinning hair, the gesture sharp and agitated. Switched it off. Or moved it. He stared at the drone feed, his gaze fixed on the central altar stone. We were so close, Anya. So close to understanding. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the laptop and the distant rumble of approaching vehicles. The military presence around Stonehenge had tripled overnight. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their faces grim, their movements tense. It was clear they weren't there for crowd control. Anya closed the laptop, the sudden snap echoing in the small, cramped tent. We need to widen the search, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor of unease that ran through her. The energy signature, the resonance, it has to be somewhere. If it's not at Stonehenge, it's somewhere else. Armitage nodded slowly. He knew she was right. The global network theory. If Stonehenge was just one node in a larger system, then the energy could have been diverted, shifted to another location. But where? The other sites, he murmured, his eyes distant. Easter Island, the Nazca Lines, the pyramids. The thought hung in the air, heavy and ominous. If the energy they had detected at Stonehenge was capable of, well, they still weren't sure what it was capable of, but the escalating global phenomena, the strange weather patterns, the increased seismic activity, suggested something vast and profoundly unsettling. If that power had been transferred, amplified perhaps, at one of these other locations. A chill snaked down Anya's spine. We need to contact the other teams, she said, reaching for her satellite phone. The ones at Giza, at Nazca. Her words were cut short by a sharp crackle from the radio. A panicked voice, distorted by static, filled the tent. Base camp to all units, we have a situation. Repeat, we have a situation? Armitage snatched the radio, his face pale. Report. The voice on the other end was barely audible, choked with fear. Movement? The stones? The transmission abruptly cut off, replaced by a chilling silence. Anya and Armitage exchanged a look, the unspoken fear mirroring in their eyes. Get the jeep, Armitage barked, already moving towards the tent flap. The scene that greeted them outside was chaos. Soldiers were shouting, weapons raised, pointing towards the towering stones of Stonehenge. The pre-dawn sky pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly light, a sickly green that cast long, distorted shadows across the plain. And the stones, they were moving. Not the slow, creeping movement of geological time, but a deliberate, purposeful shifting. The massive sarsens, each weighing tons, rotated and slid against each other, grinding and groaning like ancient bones. The trilithons swayed, their immense weight defying gravity as they rearranged themselves into a new, unknown configuration. A low, guttural hum, deeper and more resonant than anything they had detected before, emanated from the heart of the stone circle. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The air crackled with an unseen energy. Anya felt a primal terror grip her, a chilling certainty that they were witnessing something beyond human comprehension. This wasn't archaeology anymore, this was something else entirely. As the stones settled into their new formation, the humming intensified, resonating deep within their chests, a vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. The green light pulsed brighter, bathing the landscape in an unnatural glow. And then, from the center of the circle, a beam of pure, blinding white light shot skyward, piercing the clouds and disappearing into the vast, indifferent expanse of space. Anya stumbled back, shielding her eyes. Beside her, Armitage stood frozen, his face a mask of horrified awe. The message had been sent. And somewhere, out there in the cosmos, something had answered. To be continued? Part 9. The Whispering Gallery. The drone footage was unsettling. Not terrifying, not overtly horrific, but deeply, profoundly unsettling. The stones of Avebury, bathed in the pre-dawn gloom, pulsed with a faint, internal light. It wasn't a steady glow, but a rhythmic throb, like a gargantuan stone heart beating slowly, steadily. As the drone flew closer, the audio picked up a low hum, almost sub-audible, vibrating through the air itself. It was a sound that burrowed into your skull, a resonant frequency that made your teeth ache and your vision blur. Back in the makeshift command center, the team huddled around the monitor, faces pale in the flickering light. Professor Armitage, his hand trembling, reached for a glass of water, spilling half of it down his front. It's resonating, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Just like Stonehenge, but stronger. Sarah, the lead engineer, pointed to a graph on her tablet. The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever this is, it's building. And fast. The hum intensified, resonating through the command center now. The lights flickered, and a metallic tang filled the air. The drone, still transmitting, began to shake violently. The image on the monitor distorted, streaked with static. We're losing the drone, Sarah shouted over the rising hum. The interference is too strong. The screen went black. The silence that followed was almost worse than the hum. It was a thick, heavy silence, pregnant with an unseen terror. Everyone held their breath, listening, waiting. And then, a new sound emerged. A whisper, faint at first, barely audible, it seemed to emanate from the very walls of the room. It grew slowly, coalescing into a chorus of whispers, a murmuring cacophony that seemed to speak in a language both ancient and utterly alien. What is that?" whispered Daniel, the youngest member of the team, his eyes wide with terror. Armitage shook his head, his face ashen. "I don't know, but I don't like it." The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into intricate patterns of sound. They seemed to be trying to communicate something, but the meaning remained just beyond grasp. It was like standing on the edge of understanding, forever separated by a veil of incomprehensible whispers. Sarah, her face pale and drawn, grabbed her tablet again, frantically tapping at the screen. "I'm trying to isolate the frequency," she said, her voice strained. "Maybe I can filter out the noise and..." Her voice trailed off as the whispers intensified, building to a crescendo that filled the room, drowning out all other sounds. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the lights flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. Suddenly, one of the researchers, a young woman named Emily, screamed. She clutched at her head, her eyes rolling back in her sockets. Her body began to convulse, her limbs thrashing wildly. "Emily!" shouted Armitage, rushing to her side. He tried to restrain her, but her strength was unnatural, almost inhuman. She thrashed and writhed, her screams echoing through the room. The whispers intensified, focusing on Emily, swirling around her like a vortex of sound. Her screams morphed into a guttural chanting, a strange, rhythmic intonation that mirrored the pulsing hum from Avebury. Her skin began to glow with a faint, internal light, the same sickly green hue as the stones. The rest of the team watched in horrified fascination, paralyzed by fear. They knew they should do something, but they were frozen, caught in the grip of an unseen force. The whispers held them captive, whispering secrets into their minds. Secrets they couldn't comprehend, secrets that drove them mad. Emily's chanting grew louder, more frantic, her body convulsing with increasing violence. Then, with a final, ear-splitting shriek, she went still. The whispers faded, the light died, and the room was plunged into silence. The silence stretched on, broken only by the ragged breathing of the terrified researchers. Armitage knelt beside Emily's still form, his face a mask of grief and horror. He reached out and gently closed her eyes. She's gone," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The others stared at him, their faces pale and drawn. They knew, with a chilling certainty, that Emily wasn't the last. The stones were awakening, and they were hungry. The whispers, though faded, lingered at the edge of their hearing, a constant reminder of the unseen terror that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. And within those whispers, a new message began to form, a message that spoke of a world transformed, a world reshaped by the ancient power of the stones. A world where humanity was no longer at the top of the food chain. Part 10. The Whispering Stones. The drone's flickering feed showed the interior chamber, the heart of Stonehenge. It wasn't the empty space we'd anticipated. A swirling, opalescent mist filled the center, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat. It was almost beautiful, if it wasn't for the unnerving low hum that vibrated through the drone's speakers, a sound that seemed to burrow into our bones. Professor Armitage clutched at his chest, his face ashen. "It's resonating," he whispered, his voice strained. "With the other sites, we'd linked the global network. Stonehenge wasn't just receiving energy, it was amplifying and redistributing it, a pulsating hub in a web that spanned the globe." The readings from the other sites, from the Nazca lines to the Moai of Easter Island, were spiking. The energy signature, that unsettling subsonic hum, was growing stronger, more coherent. "We need to pull the drone back," Dr. Chen said, her voice tight. "I don't like this." But it was too late. The drone, hovering precariously close to the swirling mist, began to shudder violently. The feed became distorted, static crackling across the screen. Then, a high-pitched whine pierced the air, emanating from the drone's speakers, a sound that made our teeth ache. And then, silence. The feed went dead. We stared at the blank screen, the silence in the control room amplified by the lingering echo of the whine. Professor Armitage was the first to speak, his voice trembling. Something took it. We tried to send another drone in, but the interference was too strong. An invisible barrier seemed to have sprung up around Stonehenge, blocking all signals. We were blind. That night, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible, a rustling at the edge of hearing. We dismissed them as wind, or the creaking of the old farmhouse we'd commandeered as our base of operations. But as the hours crawled by, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the ground beneath our feet. We tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, the constant hum that now permeated the air, it was all taking its toll. But then, one of the younger researchers, a bright-eyed graduate named Sarah, started screaming. She pointed a trembling finger at the corner of the room. There's something there." We saw nothing, but Sarah's terror was palpable. She clawed at her ears, her eyes wide with unadulterated fear. "They're talking to me," she shrieked. "They're telling me things." We tried to calm her, but she thrashed and screamed, the whispers growing louder, more distinct. We could almost hear them now, a chorus of sibilant voices, murmuring in a language we couldn't understand. The whispers spread like a contagion. Soon, another researcher succumbed, then another. They babbled incoherently, their eyes glazed over, their bodies contorted in unnatural positions. The whispers seemed to be weaving themselves into their minds, unraveling their sanity. Professor Armitage, his face pale and drawn, grabbed my arm. "We have to leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it's contaminated." We tried to evacuate the remaining researchers, but it was chaos. The whispers had sown panic, and the farmhouse, once a sanctuary, had become a prison of echoing terror. Some ran blindly into the night, their screams swallowed by the darkness. Others huddled in corners, rocking back and forth, whispering to themselves in the strange, sibilant language. I managed to get Professor Armitage and Dr. Chen into a jeep. As we sped away from the farmhouse, I glanced back at Stonehenge, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The swirling mist seemed to have intensified, pulsing with an almost malevolent energy. And the whispers, oh God, the whispers. They followed us, clinging to the jeep like shadows, seeping into our minds. Even miles away, we could still hear them. They were no longer just whispers. They were commands, and they were growing louder. We were running out of time. The world, it seemed, was on the cusp of something terrible, something ancient and powerful, something that had been slumbering for eons, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And we, in our hubris, had given it that moment. The whispers were no longer a mystery. They were a prelude. A prelude to what? We didn't know. But one thing was certain. The whispers would soon give way to screams. Part 11. Whispers of the Depths. The humming intensified, vibrating not just through the soles of our boots, but through the very marrow of our bones. The monoliths of Stonehenge, now bathed in a pulsating, ethereal light, seemed to breathe. Alara, her face ashen, clutched the ancient manuscript tighter. Its cryptic symbols, once inert, now glowed faintly, mirroring the light emanating from the stones. "It's happening," she whispered, her voice thin and reedy. "The convergence." The ground beneath us trembled. A low, guttural groan, like the earth itself in agony, echoed across the plains. Miles, ever the pragmatist, checked his instruments. "Seismic activity spiking," he reported grimly. "Magnitude, impossible. It's off the charts." The unnatural luminescence from Stonehenge began to spread, tendrils of ghostly light snaking outwards, reaching towards other points on the horizon. Alara pointed, her hand shaking. "Avebury, Silbury Hill, they're activating." The realization hit us like a physical blow. Stonehenge wasn't just a single point of energy, it was a node in a vast, interconnected network. A network that was now awakening. And if Alara's interpretations of the manuscript were correct, this awakening was a prelude to something far more terrifying. We scrambled back towards the Land Rover, the ground trembling more violently with each passing second. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of dread clinging to us like a shroud. As we drove, the landscape itself seemed to warp and distort. Familiar hills shimmered like mirages, trees twisted into grotesque shapes, and the sky pulsed with an eerie, phosphorescent glow. We reached Avebury, the prehistoric henge even larger than Stonehenge, to find a scene of utter chaos. The massive standing stones were radiating a blinding white light, forcing us to shield our eyes. The few remaining villagers, their faces contorted in terror, ran screaming through the streets, pursued by something. Something we couldn't quite see, yet its presence was undeniable. A chilling coldness permeated the air, accompanied by the faintest whisper of voices. Not human voices, but something ancient, something alien. "They're coming," Alara gasped, clutching the manuscript to her chest. The Guardians. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a cacophony of inhuman sounds that grated on our nerves. Then, through the shimmering light, we saw them. Shadowy figures, tall and gaunt, their forms flickering and unstable, like projections from a nightmare. They moved with an unnerving grace, gliding across the ground, their forms seeming to defy the laws of physics. One of the villagers, a young woman, stumbled and fell, directly in the path of one of the figures. It stopped, its form solidifying for a fleeting moment. We saw then what lay beneath the shadows. A face that was both human and inhuman, its features stretched and distorted, its eyes burning with a cold, malevolent light. The figure reached out, its hand passing through the woman's chest. She didn't scream, she simply vanished, as if she had never existed. Terror lent us speed. We spun the Land Rover around, fleeing back towards the relative safety of the open road. But the Guardians were everywhere. We saw them flickering at the edges of our vision, their whispers pursuing us like spectral hounds. Miles drove like a man possessed, weaving through the increasingly unstable landscape. The road ahead seemed to buckle and twist, as if reality itself was unraveling. We passed through villages deserted, their inhabitants vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a lingering sense of dread and the faint echoes of those inhuman whispers. "We have to find somewhere safe," Miles yelled over the roar of the engine and the cacophony of whispers. "Somewhere these things can't reach us." Alara, her eyes fixed on the glowing manuscript, shook her head. "There is nowhere safe," she murmured, her voice filled with despair. "The convergence is only the beginning. They are reclaiming this world. And we are in their way." As darkness descended, painting the already terrifying landscape in even more ominous tones, we found ourselves surrounded. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of alien voices that seemed to claw at our sanity. The Guardians closed in, their shadowy forms solidifying around us, their cold, malevolent eyes burning into our souls. We were trapped, with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And as the last vestiges of hope flickered and died, we knew, with chilling certainty, that we were about to witness the true horror of what lay beneath the stones. The horror of a world reclaimed by forces beyond our comprehension. Part 12. The humming silence. The helicopter's rotors beat a frantic rhythm against the oppressive silence that had settled over Salisbury Plain. Below, Stonehenge, stripped bare of its mystical aura, resembled a skeletal hand reaching for a sky that offered no comfort. The unnatural stillness extended beyond the henge, swallowing the usual sounds of the wind whispering through the grass and the distant bleating of sheep. It was a silence that hummed, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in your teeth and the marrow of your bones. Dr. Albright, his face pale and drawn, pointed a trembling finger at the central altar stone. The resonance, it's amplified. Concentrated. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white. The air crackled with unseen energy, the hairs on my arms standing on end. The Geiger counter clipped hysterically, a frantic counterpoint to the ominous hum. The readings were off the charts, but it wasn't just radiation. It was something else. Something that felt ancient and malevolent. "We need to get closer," Albright insisted, his eyes fixated on the altar stone. "We need to understand what's happening." The pilot, a grizzled veteran named Davies, shook his head. "No way, Doc. Whatever's down there, it's not natural. My instruments are going haywire. The air pressure is fluctuating. We're too close already." Albright ignored him, fumbling with the harness securing him to his seat. "We're so close to understanding. This could be the key to everything." "Albright, listen to me," I yelled over the deafening hum and the insistent clicking of the Geiger counter. "This isn't worth our lives. We need to get out of here." But Albright was lost to his obsession. He unclipped his harness and lurched towards the open door. "The energy, I can feel it, it's calling me." Before I could stop him, he jumped. I watched in horrified fascination as he plummeted towards the silent circle of stones. He didn't scream. He didn't even make a sound. It was as if the humming silence had swallowed him whole. "Albright," I roared, leaning out the door, my stomach churning. But he was gone, vanished into the heart of the henge. Davies swore under his breath and yanked the helicopter upwards, away from the oppressive force emanating from the stones. As we climbed, I caught one last glimpse of the altar stone. It seemed to glow faintly, pulsating with an unearthly light. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, swallowed by the gathering dusk. We flew back to the temporary base camp, the silence following us like a shroud. I couldn't shake the image of Albright falling into the heart of Stonehenge, drawn in by some unseen force. His obsession had cost him his life. Back at the base, the remaining team members were in a state of controlled panic. The unusual silence, the humming, the escalating energy readings, all of it pointed towards something catastrophic. We were dealing with forces far beyond our comprehension. We need to contact the authorities, I said, my voice hoarse. We need to evacuate the area. This isn't just Stonehenge anymore. It's something else. But the communication lines were down. The humming silence had disrupted everything. We were alone, cut off from the outside world, trapped in the shadow of a monstrous, awakening power. That night, I couldn't sleep. The humming vibrated through the thin walls of the prefab building, a constant, unsettling presence. I kept seeing Albright's face, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of fear and fascination as he fell towards the altar stone. I went outside, drawn by an inexplicable urge to see Stonehenge again. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the plain. The henge was a dark silhouette against the horizon, radiating an almost palpable aura of dread. And then I heard it. A low, guttural chant, rising from the heart of the stone circle. It was a language I didn't understand, but it resonated with something deep within my primal core, filling me with a chilling sense of foreboding. It was a sound that spoke of rituals older than humanity, of powers beyond our ken. The humming grew stronger, the chant louder. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something terrible was about to happen. Something that would change the world forever. And we, the unwitting witnesses to this awakening, were powerless to stop it. The stones of Stonehenge pulsed with an unearthly light, the chant reaching a crescendo. And in that moment, I understood. Stonehenge wasn't just a part of a global energy network. It was the key to unlocking something ancient and terrifying. Something that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for its time to rise again. The silence after the tremor was more terrifying than the shaking itself. The air, thick with the coppery tang of blood and the ozone smell of displaced energy, hung heavy and still. I clutched Alara's hand, her fingers cold and clammy in mine. The torches we'd lit flickered erratically, casting grotesque dancing shadows across the cavern walls, highlighting the unsettlingly smooth, almost polished surfaces. Did we do that? Alara's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She gestured to the fissure that now snaked across the floor, glowing faintly with a pulsating, otherworldly light. I shook my head, unable to speak. The energy, the sheer raw power that had coursed through the stones, was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It was ancient, primal, and completely beyond our comprehension. It felt wrong. We continued deeper into the network, the fissure our unsettling guide. The air grew colder, and the silence deepened, punctuated only by the soft drip of water and the rasp of our own breathing. The carvings on the walls became more intricate, depicting scenes of strange rituals and beings that defied description. They seemed to writhe in the flickering torchlight, their eyes following our every move. Hours bled into each other. The tunnel began to slope downwards, the air growing thick with a cloying, sweet scent that made my head spin. We passed chambers filled with bizarre, organic machinery, pulsing and humming with a sickly yellow light. They looked like giant, fleshy pods, connected by a network of pulsating veins, and the air around them vibrated with a low, almost sub-audible hum. Alara stumbled, her hand flying to her mouth. I don't feel well, she whispered, her face pale and drawn. I steadied her, my own stomach churning. The air was oppressive, making it difficult to breathe. The sweet smell intensified, becoming almost sickeningly sweet, like overripe fruit mixed with something else. Something metallic and acrid. We pressed on, driven by a desperate need to understand, to find some answers to the questions that plagued us. What was this place? What was its purpose? And what was the source of the immense power we had felt? Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The scale of it was breathtaking. The ceiling was lost in the shadows high above, and the walls curved away into the distance, disappearing into the oppressive darkness. In the center of the cavern, bathed in a pulsating, otherworldly light, was a structure unlike anything I had ever seen. It was a colossal sphere, seemingly made of the same polished, black stone as the tunnel walls. Intricate carvings covered its surface, depicting scenes of cosmic horror, of stars being born and dying, of galaxies colliding, and of beings that defied description. Beings with too many eyes, too many limbs, and a malevolence that radiated outwards like a physical force. The sphere pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, the light emanating from within growing brighter and then dimmer, like a giant, alien heart. The sweet, cloying smell was overwhelming here, and the air thrummed with the same low hum we had heard in the smaller chambers, only amplified 1,000-fold. As we approached the sphere, a wave of dizziness washed over me. Alara cried out, clutching her head. The carvings on the sphere seemed to shift and writhe, their eyes burning into us with a malevolent intensity. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath our feet began to tremble. Then, we saw them. Figures emerged from the shadows at the edge of the cavern. They were tall and slender, their bodies draped in flowing, dark robes. Their faces were hidden by hoods, but I could feel their eyes on us, cold and calculating. They moved with an unnerving grace, gliding across the cavern floor as if they were floating. One of the figures raised a hand, and the sphere pulsed brighter, the light intensifying until it was almost blinding. The humming grew louder, resonating deep within my chest. I felt a pull, a force drawing me towards the sphere, towards the heart of the darkness. Alara screamed, pulling at my arm. "We have to get out of here. We have to leave." I wanted to agree. I wanted to run, to escape the oppressive atmosphere and the chilling presence of the robed figures. But something held me back. A morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand. The robed figure lowered its hand, and the light dimmed slightly. The humming subsided, but the air remained charged with energy. The figure stepped forward, its hood falling back to reveal a face that was both alien and unsettlingly familiar. Its skin was pale and smooth, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. Its eyes were large and black, devoid of pupils, and they glowed with an unnatural light. It spoke, its voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate within my skull. "Welcome," it said, its voice echoing through the cavern. "We have been expecting you." My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we had stumbled upon something far more ancient, far more powerful, and far more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. We had found the source of the energy, the heart of the network. And we were trapped. Part 14. The Humming Earth. The silence after the resonant clang of the fallen trilithon was more terrifying than any scream. It pressed in on us, a suffocating blanket woven with anticipation. Dust motes danced in the beams of our headlamps, illuminating the disturbed earth where the ancient stone had stood for millennia. A sense of wrongness permeated the air, a chilling discordance like a musical note played slightly off-key. Professor Armitage, his face pale and drawn, knelt by the fallen stone, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings that now lay exposed to the elements. The carvings, previously hidden beneath the earth, pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, the color of old bone. This changes everything," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "These symbols, they aren't just decorative. They're a language of energy." He looked up at us, his eyes wide and haunted. Stonehenge wasn't just receiving energy, it was directing it, and now it's uncontrolled. A low hum began to vibrate through the ground, so subtle at first that I thought I imagined it. But it grew steadily, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. The remaining stones of Stonehenge began to glow, their surfaces shimmering with an unearthly light. The air crackled with static, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. "We have to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. Now. We didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled back, away from the pulsating stones, the humming earth vibrating through our boots. As we reached the perimeter of the site, the humming intensified, morphing into a low, guttural drone. The ground began to tremble, and cracks spider-webbed across the tarmac of the visitors' center car park. We piled into the Land Rover, fumbling with the keys, the air thick with panic. The engine roared to life, and we sped away, leaving behind the glowing, humming monstrosity that Stonehenge had become. As we drove, the unsettling drone followed us, a constant, oppressive presence. The car radio, which had been silent since our arrival at Stonehenge, suddenly crackled to life, spitting out bursts of static interspersed with distorted voices speaking in a language none of us recognized. "It's spreading," Professor Armitage muttered, staring out the window at the darkening countryside. "The energy, it's not contained anymore." The unsettling hum grew stronger, accompanied by a new, more disturbing phenomenon. The earth beneath us seemed to breathe, rising and falling in slow, undulating waves. Trees swayed in time with the silent rhythm, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes. We drove through deserted villages, the houses dark and empty, as if the inhabitants had fled in the face of some unseen terror. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable sense of dread. The further we drove, the more pronounced the earth's breathing became, until it felt as if we were traveling across the back of some colossal, slumbering beast. Suddenly, the Land Rover lurched violently, throwing us against our seats. One of the tires had burst, shredded as if by some invisible force. We skidded to a halt, the engine stalling. We stumbled out of the car, the oppressive hum now a physical pressure against our eardrums. The earth beneath our feet undulated, making us feel nauseous and disoriented. In the distance, we saw flashes of light on the horizon, flickering like a dying fire. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Professor Armitage squinted, his face etched with fear. "I don't know, but I don't think it's good." We began to walk, the uneven ground making our progress slow and arduous. The flashes of light grew closer, revealing themselves to be electrical discharges, arcing across the sky like jagged veins of lightning. The humming intensified, morphing into a deafening roar. We reached the crest of a hill, and the source of the light and the sound was revealed. In the valley below, the earth was rippling and convulsing, the ground splitting open to reveal glowing fissures. Tendrils of energy, the same eerie bone-white color as the carvings on the fallen trilithon, snaked across the landscape, connecting the fissures like a network of glowing veins. The air crackled with static, and the smell of ozone filled our nostrils. The earth beneath our feet trembled violently, and we struggled to maintain our balance. The humming roar intensified, reaching a crescendo that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. And then, rising from the heart of the chaos, we saw it. A colossal shape, shrouded in swirling energy, its form only vaguely discernible in the flickering light. It was immense, dwarfing the surrounding landscape, its presence radiating an aura of ancient, unimaginable power. It had awakened, and it was hungry. Part 15. The whispers grow louder. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the dusty maps spread out on the table. The air in the caravan felt thick, charged with a nervous energy that vibrated in my teeth. Eleanor traced a trembling finger across the lines connecting Stonehenge to other ancient sites, Easter Island, the Nazca Lines, the Pyramids of Giza. Each one pulsed with an unseen energy, a faint hum that resonated deep within the earth. We knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were linked. Linked and awakening. "It's accelerating," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse. "The energy readings, the seismic activity, it's all increasing exponentially." John, his face etched with a grim determination, nodded. "The closer we get to the summer solstice, the stronger it becomes. We're running out of time." The solstice. The day when the sun reached its zenith, when the ancient stones supposedly aligned with the celestial bodies, channeling an unimaginable power. A power that, judging by the escalating global anomalies, was far more sinister than we'd ever imagined. The news reports filtering through our battered radio spoke of strange occurrences across the globe. Flocks of birds falling dead from the sky, whales beaching themselves en masse, unexplained sinkholes swallowing entire villages. The world seemed to be unraveling at the seams, and the humming of the stones grew louder with each passing day. We'd managed to evade the authorities so far, moving from one hidden location to another, following the trail of ancient whispers. Our research, fueled by deciphering fragmented texts and local folklore, had led us closer to understanding the purpose of this global network. It wasn't simply about energy, it was about control. Control of the very fabric of reality. That night, sleep evaded me. The wind howled outside the caravan, a mournful cry that mirrored the unease gnawing at my soul. I lay staring at the ceiling, the faint, rhythmic thrum of the earth a constant, unsettling presence. Then, I heard it. A whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind, rustling through the trees. But it grew louder, clearer, weaving its way into my consciousness. It wasn't a language I understood, yet I felt its meaning seep into my bones, cold and alien. It spoke of power, of dominance, of a coming reign. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding against my ribs. Eleanor stirred beside me, her eyes fluttering open. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She nodded, her face pale in the dim light. "It's in my head," she breathed. "It's like it's trying to communicate." The whispering intensified, swirling around us like a malevolent fog. It felt like an invasion, a violation of the deepest recesses of our minds. Images flashed before my eyes. Swirling vortexes of energy, towering monoliths pulsating with an unearthly light, grotesque, inhuman figures emerging from the shadows. We weren't alone. Whatever force was awakening in the stones, it was aware of us. It was watching us. Driven by a primal fear, we scrambled out of the caravan, gasping for breath in the cool night air. The whispering followed us, relentless, inescapable. We looked towards the east, where the first faint streaks of dawn were beginning to paint the sky. And then we saw it. A shimmering, ethereal light pulsed on the horizon, emanating from the direction of Stonehenge. It grew brighter, more intense, until it bathed the landscape in an eerie glow. The humming of the earth intensified, resonating with the whispering in our minds, creating a cacophony of dread. We knew then that something terrible was about to happen. The solstice was approaching, and with it, the awakening of a power beyond our comprehension. The earth beneath our feet trembled, and the whispering, no longer subtle, became a chorus of chilling pronouncements. They spoke of a new world order. A world ruled by the ancient ones, the entities that had slumbered for millennia beneath the earth, their power now channeled through the global network of stones. They spoke of humanity's subservience, our role as mere vessels for their will. The chilling truth sank in. We hadn't been studying the stones. We had been chosen, groomed, prepared to be heralds of the new age. The whispering intensified, promising power, promising knowledge, promising a place in the new world order. But the price was our very humanity. Eleanor gripped my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to stop them," she whispered, her voice trembling. But how could we possibly stop a force that was woven into the very fabric of the planet? A force that had been dormant for eons, waiting for the right moment to rise again? The light on the horizon intensified, blinding in its brilliance. The whispering reached a crescendo, drowning out all other sounds. The earth shuddered violently, and we clung to each other, two insignificant figures against the backdrop of an impending apocalypse. And in that moment, I understood. We weren't meant to stop them. We were meant to join them. The whispers promised us a place in the new world, a place of power and influence. All we had to do was surrender. The solstice was almost upon us. And the whispers were growing louder. Part 16. The Obsidian Mirror. The drone's flickering feed showed us a cavern bathed in an unsettling green glow. Not the luminescence of phosphorescent moss, but something deeper, radiating from the walls themselves. The air shimmered, distorted by unseen energies. The sound was even more unnerving, a low, rhythmic thrumming that resonated deep within our chests, like a second, sluggish heartbeat. "It's the heart," Alara whispered, her voice hoarse. "The heart of the network." We had followed the energy signature, tracing it from Stonehenge, across continents, to this hidden cave system beneath the Andes. Each site we visited, each stone circle or henge, had pulsed with greater intensity, the hum growing louder, the air thicker with unseen power. Now, at the apparent source, the energy was almost palpable, a heavy blanket pressing down on us. The drone descended cautiously into the cavern. The green glow intensified, revealing intricate carvings on the walls, stylized figures with elongated limbs and vacant eyes, echoing the statues we'd encountered at other sites. But here, they weren't mere statues. They pulsed with the same green light, their eyes seeming to follow the drone's every move. At the cavern's center, a vast, obsidian structure dominated the space. It was roughly circular, smooth and polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the eerie green light back into the cavern, multiplying the unsettling effect. It looked like a giant, black eye staring back at us, and the rhythmic thrumming seemed to emanate from its depths. "What is it?" Daniel's voice was barely a breath. "I don't know," Alara admitted, her eyes glued to the monitor. "But I think it's listening." A sudden surge of static erupted from the drone's speakers, followed by a piercing shriek that made us jump. The image on the monitor twisted and warped, the green light flaring blindingly before cutting to black. The drone was gone. Silence descended on the control room, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint hum of the equipment, a chilling reminder of the vast, unseen network we had tapped into. We lost contact, Daniel stated the obvious, his voice strained. The energy, it overloaded the drone's systems. Alara remained silent, staring at the blank monitor, her face pale. It wasn't an overload, she finally whispered. It was intentional. It didn't want us to see. The implications of her words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. We had been probing, poking at a power we didn't understand, and now, it had responded. We need to go there, I said, the words escaping before I could fully process the thought. We need to see it for ourselves. Both Alara and Daniel turned to me, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. A morbid curiosity, perhaps. The same force that had drawn us this far, the same inexplicable pull, was now demanding we go further. The journey to the cavern was arduous. The entrance was hidden deep in the Andes, accessible only by a treacherous mountain trail. We packed lightly, taking only essential equipment, a portable generator, lights, a first aid kit, and a single, heavily modified drone, designed to withstand the energy surges we anticipated. We left behind any sophisticated recording equipment, knowing it would be useless in the face of the powerful energies at play. The air grew colder and thinner as we climbed. The mountain loomed above us, a dark, brooding presence against the star-strewn sky. The closer we got to the cavern entrance, the stronger the thrumming became, resonating in our bones, a constant, unnerving reminder of what awaited us. We finally reached the cave mouth just as dawn was breaking, painting the eastern sky in hues of pink and orange. The entrance was small and unassuming, almost hidden amongst the jagged rocks. But the air around it shimmered, a faint green haze clinging to the edges of the opening. Taking a deep breath, we stepped into the darkness. The green glow enveloped us instantly, bathing the cavern in its eerie light. The thrumming intensified, a physical pressure against our eardrums. The carvings on the walls, the stylized figures with their empty eyes, seemed to watch us, their silence more menacing than any scream. We moved cautiously towards the center of the cavern, our lights cutting through the green haze, revealing the obsidian mirror in all its unsettling glory. It was even larger than it had appeared on the drone feed, dominating the space with its dark, reflective surface. The rhythmic thrumming pulsed from its depths, a hypnotic beat that seemed to seep into our minds. Alara stepped forward, drawn to the obsidian surface as if by an invisible thread. She reached out a hand, her fingers hovering just above the smooth, black surface. The green glow intensified, reflecting in her wide, mesmerized eyes. "It's calling to me," she whispered, her voice distant and hollow. "I can hear it, inside my head." She pressed her palm against the obsidian, and the cavern erupted in a blinding flash of green light. Part 17. Whispers in the Static. The flickering candlelight danced on Amelia's face, highlighting the dark circles etched beneath her eyes. The radio, our only link to the outside world, sputtered with static. The rhythmic clicking, once a source of morbid fascination, now gnawed at my nerves, a constant reminder of our isolation. We were trapped within the silent, oppressive circle of Avebury, Stonehenge's forgotten sister, waiting. Waiting for what, we didn't know. Waiting for the earth to tremble again, for the whispers to return, for the stones to breathe. The silence within the circle was unnerving. Outside, the wind howled a mournful dirge, whipping the long grass into frenzied dances. Inside, the air was stagnant, heavy, almost viscous. Amelia swore she could feel the stones pulsing with a low, rhythmic thrum, a heartbeat too deep for the human ear to detect. I, however, heard nothing but the maddening static of the radio. We had managed to scavenge some supplies from the abandoned village nearby, tinned food, blankets, a first aid kit that was woefully inadequate for the scale of our predicament. The villagers had vanished, leaving their homes and belongings untouched. It was as if they had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. The unsettling emptiness echoed the feeling within the stone circle, an emptiness that pressed in on us, suffocating, stealing our breath. "Anything?" Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shook my head, adjusting the radio's tuning knob with numb fingers. Nothing but static. Occasionally, the static would coalesce, forming fleeting snatches of distorted sound, a fragment of music, a garbled voice, a chilling, high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. Then, just as quickly, it would dissolve back into the white noise. I think I hear something," Amelia said, leaning closer to the radio. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the sounds hidden within the static. A low hum, almost sub-audible, vibrated beneath the crackling. It seemed to resonate with the oppressive stillness within the circle, amplifying the sense of dread that clung to us like a shroud. "It's the stones," Amelia whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "They're singing." I wanted to dismiss it, to attribute it to exhaustion and fear, but deep down, a primal instinct whispered that she was right. The hum grew stronger, weaving itself into the fabric of the static, transforming the random noise into something organized. Suddenly, the radio erupted in a burst of static so loud that I recoiled. Amelia cried out, clutching her ears. Then, as abruptly as it began, the static ceased. A voice, clear and resonant, filled the air. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, a language that sounded ancient, otherworldly. The words flowed like liquid darkness, each syllable dripping with an unnerving power. The voice seemed to emanate not from the radio, but from the stones themselves, as if the circle had found its voice. Amelia and I exchanged terrified glances. We understood nothing of the words, yet we felt their meaning deep in our bones. A message of warning, of impending doom. A promise of transformation. The voice continued its chilling monologue, the strange language weaving patterns of unease in the air. The stones seemed to vibrate in harmony with the words, the hum growing stronger, more insistent. I could feel a pressure building in my chest, a tightness in my throat. The air grew thick, making it difficult to breathe. Then, as if responding to an unseen cue, the stones began to glow. A faint, ethereal luminescence emanated from within the ancient monoliths, bathing the circle in an otherworldly light. The light pulsed, growing brighter with each word spoken by the unseen voice. I looked at Amelia, her face pale and drawn in the pulsating light. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the eerie glow of the stones. She looked different. Her features seemed sharper, more angular. Her skin shimmered with an unnatural pallor. I realized, with a growing sense of horror, that I was changing too. I could feel a strange energy coursing through my veins, tingling in my fingertips. My vision sharpened, the world around me appearing with unnerving clarity. The air, thick and heavy moments before, now felt charged with a vibrant, almost intoxicating energy. The voice on the radio reached a crescendo, the stones radiating an almost blinding light. The ground beneath our feet trembled. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the voice stopped. The light faded, the trembling ceased. Silence descended once again upon the circle, but it was a different silence. A charged silence, pregnant with anticipation. We stood there, bathed in the afterglow of the strange energy, our bodies buzzing with an unfamiliar power. We had heard the whispers, felt the touch of the stones, and we were no longer the same. We were connected. The radio, silent now, lay between us, a stark reminder of the world we had left behind. A world that suddenly seemed very far away. We were trapped within the circle, bound by the energy that flowed through the stones, waiting for the next stage of, whatever this was. Waiting for the transformation to complete. And in the lingering silence, I heard it. A new sound, not the hum of the stones, not the static of the radio. A whisper, close to my ear, a whisper that sounded like my own voice. But it wasn't my voice. It was the voice of the stones, echoing within my mind. A single word, repeated over and over, growing louder with each repetition. Obey, asterisk. The rhythmic thrumming, now a constant, gnawing presence in our skulls, seemed to intensify as we neared Avebury. The landscape itself felt wrong. The rolling hills, normally picturesque, were cloaked in an unnatural stillness. The sheep, usually dotting the fields, were absent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if afraid to disturb some unseen force. "This is worse than Stonehenge," Helena muttered, her hand gripping my arm with surprising strength. Her normally vibrant face was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a primal fear. The Avebury Henge, even larger than Stonehenge, rose before us, a monstrous silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. The massive stones, some weighing over 40 tons, stood sentinel, pulsating faintly with the same unearthly energy that now permeated everything. The ditch surrounding the henge, usually a dry depression, was filled with a viscous, black fluid that shimmered with an internal light. It pulsed rhythmically, in time with the thrumming in our heads, sending ripples of oily rainbows across its surface. What is that? I whispered, my voice barely audible above the relentless thrumming. Professor Armitage, his face a mask of grim determination, produced a small, metallic device from his bag. It resembled a Geiger counter, but with a series of strange, glyph-like symbols etched into its surface. He held it out towards the ditch, the needle instantly swinging wildly into the red. It's off the charts, he murmured, his voice strained. An energy signature unlike anything I've ever encountered. It's alive. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The black fluid in the ditch seemed to respond to his words, its pulsations becoming more frantic, the ripples spreading further and faster. We circumnavigated the henge, the unsettling thrumming amplifying with each step. The stones themselves felt warm to the touch, almost feverish. The air crackled with an unseen energy, causing the hairs on the back of my neck to stand on end. I felt a growing sense of dread, a primal instinct screaming at me to flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this abomination. Then we saw them. Protruding from the black fluid in the ditch were shapes. They were humanoid in form, but elongated and distorted, like grotesque parodies of human anatomy. Their skin was a sickly, translucent gray, revealing the pulsing network of veins and arteries beneath. Their eyes, large and black, devoid of pupils, stared blankly ahead, reflecting the unsettling light of the black fluid. They were silent, motionless, yet their presence radiated an aura of immense power, an ancient, malevolent intelligence that seemed to seep into our very bones. They're connected to the network, Professor Armitage whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. They're conduits, drawing power from the earth, channeling it, somewhere. Where? Helena breathed, her voice trembling. The professor shook his head, his eyes fixed on the horrifying figures in the ditch. I don't know, but I have a terrible feeling we're about to find out. As if in response to his words, the thrumming reached a crescendo. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble, the stones of the henge vibrating with increasing intensity. The black fluid in the ditch churned and roiled, the humanoid figures within it beginning to writhe and contort. Their silent screams, though unheard, echoed in the deepest recesses of our minds. The sky above us began to shift and swirl, the stars blurring into a vortex of swirling colors. A low, guttural humming resonated from the heart of the henge, growing louder with each passing second. The air crackled with static electricity, the smell of ozone thick in our nostrils. Suddenly, one of the figures in the ditch lurched forward, its elongated arm reaching out towards us. Its black eyes locked onto mine, and a wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. It was an ancient, alien intelligence, vast and incomprehensible, and in that moment, I knew, with chilling certainty, that we were not alone in the universe. And whatever had awakened within the Earth's ancient energy network was not benevolent. We stumbled back, our primal instincts screaming at us to flee. But there was nowhere to run. The henge, the landscape, the very air itself, was saturated with this malevolent presence. We were trapped, caught in the epicenter of something ancient and terrifying, something that had been slumbering for millennia, waiting to be unleashed. And now, it was awake. As the sky tore open above Avebury, revealing a blinding light that pulsed in time with the thrumming in our skulls, I knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was only the beginning. The global energy network was active, and whatever it was powering was about to make its presence known. And the world, as we knew it, would never be the same. Part 19. Whispers in the static. The drone's camera feed stuttered, the image of the Algerian site pixelating into abstract blocks of color before snapping back into focus. The wind howled, a digital shriek through the laptop speakers, making Amelia shiver despite the stifling heat of the tent. She adjusted the antenna, hoping for a clearer signal, her stomach twisting with a growing unease. Something felt wrong, profoundly wrong, beyond the unsettling familiarity of these structures mirrored across continents. Anything? Professor Armitage's voice rasped from behind her, strained and weak. He hadn't left his cot since the incident at Stonehenge, his face a mask of exhaustion and fear. The energy signature, it's fluctuating, Amelia murmured, her eyes glued to the readings scrolling across the secondary monitor. It's like it's breathing. The rhythmic pulses of energy emanating from the Algerian site were growing stronger, the peaks sharper, the troughs deeper. It mirrored the pattern they'd observed at Stonehenge, just before the resonance. Before the earth screamed. She glanced at the professor, her unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. Were they about to witness another catastrophic event, this time unfolding half a world away? We need to warn them, Armitage croaked, pushing himself up to a sitting position. The Algerian authorities, they need to be alerted. Amelia shook her head, a knot of despair tightening in her chest. Who would believe us? We barely understand this ourselves. They'll think we're mad. The wind outside intensified, whipping the tent fabric against the poles with a violence that bordered on sentient. The drone camera jerked again, the image swirling with static. Then, a low, guttural hum resonated from the laptop speakers, a sound that bypassed the ears and seemed to vibrate deep within their bones. Amelia felt a prickle of fear crawl up her spine. It was the same hum, the same unsettling resonance that had preceded the Stonehenge incident. Only this time, it was laced with something different. Something that sounded almost vocal. She leaned closer to the speakers, straining to decipher the sound buried within the static. It shifted and warped, whispers weaving through the electronic noise, too distorted to understand, yet undeniably present. A cold dread washed over her, a primal fear that reached beyond logic and reason. It felt as though something ancient, something vast and unknowable, was trying to communicate. Do you hear that? She whispered, her voice trembling. Armitage nodded slowly, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. It's like it's speaking to us. The whispering intensified, growing louder, clearer. The static began to recede, replaced by a chorus of distorted voices, echoing as if from the depths of a cavernous chasm. Amelia felt a pressure building in her head, a dizzying sensation that threatened to overwhelm her. Suddenly, the drone camera feed cut out, replaced by a blank screen. The humming ceased abruptly, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. The only sound was the relentless wind, now carrying a new, chilling quality. It no longer sounded like wind. It sounded like breathing. Amelia and Armitage exchanged a look of stark terror. They knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the core, that something terrible had happened. The Algerian site, it had awakened. The silence stretched, broken only by the pounding of Amelia's heart. Then, faint and distant, a new sound reached their ears. It started as a low rumble, growing steadily louder, until it filled the air with a deep, resonant thrum. It was the same sound they had heard at Stonehenge, the sound of the earth itself groaning under an unimaginable strain. Amelia scrambled for the radio, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the microphone. She had to try, had to warn someone, anyone. She fumbled with the frequency, desperately trying to reach the outside world. This is Dr. Amelia Hayes. Do you read me? Do you read? Her voice was cut off by a deafening roar. The ground beneath the tent began to tremble violently, the poles groaning under the strain. Amelia clutched at Armitage, her eyes wide with terror as the world around them seemed to dissolve into chaos. The tent ripped apart, flung away by an unseen force. Amelia was thrown to the ground, the wind tearing at her clothes, the dust stinging her eyes. She looked up, her vision blurring, and saw a sight that would forever be etched into her memory. The sky above the Algerian site was ablaze with an otherworldly light, pulsing and shifting like a living organism. Tendrils of energy reached down from the heavens, connecting with the ancient stones below. And from the heart of the site, a pillar of blinding white light erupted, reaching towards the sky, a beacon of unimaginable power. The whispering had stopped. Now, the earth itself was screaming. The last thing Amelia saw before darkness consumed her was a wave of energy, a tsunami of pure power, sweeping across the desert towards them, obliterating everything in its path. And within that wave, she saw them. Silhouettes, dark and indistinct, moving with unnatural speed, carried on the tide of destruction. They were coming. The wind howled a mournful dirge through the skeletal remains of Salisbury. We huddled deeper into the battered Land Rover, the feeble heater doing little to ward off the creeping cold that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. Sarah clutched a tattered map, her face illuminated by the flickering dashboard lights, while Father Michael muttered a ceaseless litany under his breath, his rosary beads clicking a frantic rhythm against the dashboard. According to this, Sarah's voice trembled, her finger tracing a line that snaked across the faded parchment. The next nodal point is Avebury. Avebury, another ancient henge, larger even than Stonehenge, a sprawling behemoth of earth and stone. My stomach twisted. Each deactivated henge, while momentarily stemming the tide of whatever it was, also seemed to intensify the oppressive atmosphere, to draw the darkness closer. It felt like slowly deflating a monstrous, malevolent balloon. The pressure simply shifted, becoming more concentrated, more potent. We drove in silence, the rhythmic thump of the tires against the cracked tarmac the only sound besides the wind and Father Michael's prayers. The landscape outside was bleak and desolate, stripped bare by the pulsating energy storms that had ravaged the countryside. Twisted, blackened trees clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers, and the air crackled with a faint, unsettling static charge. We saw no other vehicles, no signs of life. Just the endless, oppressive expanse of nothing. As we approached Avebury, the static intensified, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The car radio, which had been stubbornly silent for days, burst into life with a cacophony of distorted voices, whispering, chanting, gibbering in languages I didn't recognize. I slammed my fist against the power button, but the noise persisted, seeming to emanate from the air itself, vibrating in my teeth. Avebury loomed out of the gloom, its massive stones casting long, distorted shadows in the twilight. Unlike Stonehenge, which had been reduced to a charred husk, Avebury seemed different. The stones hummed with an unnatural energy, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated deep within my chest. The ground beneath our feet trembled. "It's active," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. The village that nestled within the henge was deserted, its houses dark and empty, windows staring out like vacant eyes. An unnatural stillness hung in the air, broken only by the insistent hum of the stones. "We need to find the control point," Father Michael said, his voice strangely calm amidst the growing unease. "The focal point of the energy flow. That's how we shut it down." We consulted the map, our hands shaking. The parchment indicated a small mound within the inner circle of stones, marked with a cryptic symbol that resembled a coiled serpent. As we made our way towards it, the hum grew louder, the ground vibrating more intensely. The air crackled with static, and the whispering voices in my head intensified, becoming a swirling vortex of unintelligible sounds. The mound was surrounded by a circle of smaller stones, pulsating with an eerie, greenish light. As we approached, the ground beneath us seemed to dissolve, revealing a gaping chasm filled with the same swirling, luminescent fog we'd seen at Stonehenge. The air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The whispering voices reached a crescendo, coalescing into a single, guttural voice that spoke directly into my mind. "Join us, become one, asterisk." The voice was seductive, promising, yet filled with an ancient, unfathomable malice. I felt a pull towards the chasm, an overwhelming urge to leap into the swirling abyss. Beside me, Sarah swayed, her eyes glazed over, a faint smile playing on her lips. Father Michael grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Resist it," he shouted, his voice strained. "It's trying to control you." He fumbled with his satchel, pulling out a small silver crucifix and holding it aloft. The crucifix glowed with a soft, white light, pushing back the swirling green mist. The whispering voices recoiled, their seductive murmur turning into a shriek of frustration. "The serpent," Father Michael gasped, pointing to a carving on one of the smaller stones. It was the same symbol as on the map, the coiled serpent, but now it seemed to writhe and twist, its eyes glowing with the same unsettling green light as the mist. "We need to destroy it," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. "That's the control point." The ground beneath us lurched violently, throwing us to our knees. The humming of the stones intensified, becoming a deafening roar. From the chasm, a tendril of green mist snaked out, reaching for us with unnatural speed. The whispering voices returned, stronger than ever, filling my mind with promises of power and oblivion. Join us, become one, asterisk. We were running out of time. The world seemed to tilt, the sky swirling with a kaleidoscope of colors. The stones of Avebury pulsed and throbbed, their energy reaching a fever pitch. The chasm widened, the swirling green mist spilling out, consuming everything in its path. And then, from the depths of the earth, a low, guttural growl echoed through the air, a sound that promised nothing but death and destruction. Something was coming. Part 21 would begin with the arrival of, whatever it is. Part 21. The humming earth. The silence after the scream was more terrifying than the scream itself. Elias clutched Amelia, his hand trembling against her damp, cold cheek. The wind whipped across Salisbury Plain, a mournful howl that echoed the desolate emptiness in their hearts. The monolith that had held Alara, their Alara, was now just another silent stone in the circle, radiating a subtle, sickening heat. They couldn't stay, not with the image of her disintegration seared into their retinas. Not with the knowledge that Stonehenge, this supposed cradle of ancient wisdom, was a monstrous altar demanding human sacrifice. They stumbled back towards the abandoned Land Rover, the churning mud sucking at their boots like grasping hands. The drive back to London was a blur of shared trauma and whispered fears. The world outside the car seemed distorted, unreal. Every tree, every hill, every passing vehicle held a menacing aura. The humming had intensified, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in their bones, in the chassis of the car, in the very air itself. It felt like the earth itself was holding its breath, bracing for something catastrophic. They arrived in London to find a city on edge. The news was filled with reports of strange phenomena, unexplained power outages, erratic animal behavior, seismic tremors in areas with no fault lines. The humming was audible here too, a pervasive drone that burrowed into the subconscious. People walked with a hurried, nervous energy, their eyes darting around as if expecting something to leap out of the shadows. They found Professor Armitage in his study, hunched over a table strewn with maps and charts. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes bloodshot. He looked up as they entered, a flicker of grim recognition in his gaze. "It's begun," he said, his voice hoarse. "The convergence." Elias and Amelia exchanged a worried glance. Convergence? What did that even mean? "The stones," Armitage continued, gesturing to the maps. "They're not just individual sites. They're nodes in a global network. Stonehenge, the pyramids, Easter Island, Machu Picchu, they're all connected. And they're all channeling energy towards a single point." He pointed to a map of the Pacific Ocean. "Here, somewhere beneath the waves, there's a nexus. A focal point for all this power. And what happens when all the energy converges?" Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Armitage looked at them, his expression a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. "I don't know for sure," he admitted. "But the ancient texts hint at an awakening. Something ancient and powerful slumbering beneath the waves. Something that was imprisoned long ago, and is now about to be released." The humming outside intensified, resonating through the room. The floor vibrated beneath their feet. The air crackled with an unseen energy. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the study into darkness. A collective gasp rose from the streets outside. "It's happening," Armitage whispered, his voice barely audible above the rising hum. They huddled together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of chaos erupting outside. Car alarms blared, people screamed, and the ominous hum grew louder, deeper, more pervasive. It was a symphony of fear and impending doom. Then, through the window, they saw it. A pulsating light emanating from the east, growing brighter with each passing second. It wasn't the warm glow of sunrise, but a cold, otherworldly luminescence that painted the sky in shades of sickly green and violet. "The Nexus," Armitage breathed, his eyes wide with terror. As the light intensified, the humming reached a fever pitch, vibrating the very foundations of the building. Cracks appeared on the walls, spreading like spiderwebs. The ground began to shake violently, as if a giant hand was reaching up from the depths of the earth. Amelia clutched Elias's hand, her knuckles white. He could feel the tremors in her body, mirroring his own fear. They looked at each other, their eyes reflecting the unnatural light that flooded the room. They knew, with a chilling certainty, that the world was about to change forever. And not for the better. The humming reached a crescendo, then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, a pregnant pause before the inevitable. Then, a low, guttural growl echoed through the city, a sound that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal, it was something ancient, something alien, something awakened. The last thing Elias saw before the world went black was the ceiling collapsing, bringing with it the weight of a world on the brink of annihilation. Part 22. The Whispering Stones. The air crackled, not with electricity, but with something else. Something ancient and profoundly unsettling. The humming from Stonehenge had intensified, resonating deep within my chest, a physical vibration that threatened to shake my bones apart. Elena clutched my arm, her face ashen in the ethereal glow emanating from the stones. The glyphs, now blazing with a malevolent inner light, writhed and shifted, their meaning still tantalizingly out of reach. We were close, I knew it. Close to understanding the purpose, the terrifying truth behind this global network of power. But a primal fear, a deep-seated dread that resonated with the very stones themselves, warned me against further pursuit. It whispered of cosmic horrors, of powers beyond human comprehension, best left undisturbed. We weren't alone. Shadows danced in the periphery of our vision, flitting between the standing stones, too fast to truly grasp. They weren't the shadows of the clouds obscuring the blood-red moon, but something more substantial, more sentient. A low, guttural chanting, a language older than any I'd ever heard, drifted on the wind, weaving itself into the hum of the stones. It resonated in my skull, a discordant symphony of fear and dread. Elena pointed a trembling finger towards the altar stone. A figure had coalesced there, solidifying out of the swirling energy like a phantom emerging from the grave. It was vaguely humanoid, tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its skin, if it could be called skin, seemed to be woven from the same shimmering energy as the glyphs, flickering and distorting. No features were discernible, only a swirling void where a face should have been, a void that seemed to suck the light and hope from the air around it. Terror, raw and primal, seized me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt like lead, my voice trapped in my throat. Elena whimpered beside me, burying her face in my arm. The chanting intensified, building to a crescendo that threatened to shatter the very fabric of reality. The figure raised its long, skeletal arms towards the sky. The red moon above pulsed in response, growing larger, brighter, filling the sky with its ominous glow. The hum from the stones reached a deafening pitch, and cracks spider-webbed across the ground around us, glowing with the same eerie light as the glyphs. Suddenly, the figure turned its void-like face towards us. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence that pressed against my eardrums. I felt a cold, probing sensation, as if something unseen was reaching into my very soul, examining my thoughts, my fears, my memories. It was a violation more profound than any physical touch. A single word, or perhaps a thought projected directly into my mind, echoed through my consciousness. It was not a word of any human language, but it carried a weight of meaning that crushed me beneath its immensity. It spoke of sacrifice, of cosmic alignments, of a power so vast and ancient it defied comprehension. The glyphs on the stones intensified, their light pulsing in time with the throbbing red moon. The shadows around us grew bolder, coalescing into grotesque, semi-human forms. They circled us, their movements jerky and unnatural, their whispers slithering into my ears like venomous snakes. Then, the figure on the altar stone spoke again, this time in a language I understood, although it chilled me to the bone. The time approaches, it rasped, its voice like the grinding of stones. The gateway opens. The offering must be made. Elena sobbed beside me, her grip on my arm tightening. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, what the figure meant by offering. We were the offering. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble violently. The cracks widened, glowing with an infernal light. The air shimmered, distorting the landscape around us. The whispering stones seemed to lean in, their shadows engulfing us. The figure on the altar stone extended a hand towards us, its long, skeletal fingers beckoning. The shadows closed in, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. I knew we had to escape, but how? We were trapped, surrounded by forces beyond our understanding, caught in the gears of a cosmic machine far older than humanity itself. The red moon pulsed one last time, bathing the landscape in its blood-red light. The ground beneath us gave way, and we plunged into the darkness. The last thing I heard, before the earth swallowed us whole, was the chilling laughter of the stones. Part 23. The Whispering Stones. The flickering, ethereal light emanating from Stonehenge pulsed with a sickly green hue, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed like tormented spirits. The air thrummed with a low, guttural hum, a sound that resonated deep within my bones, shaking me to my core. Around the circle, the glyphs, now fully illuminated, spun and shifted, their arcane meanings just beyond my grasp. It was as if the very fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. Elena, her face pale and drawn, clung to my arm, her breath coming in ragged gasps. We were alone. Professor Armitage and the others, driven by a strange, almost hypnotic compulsion, had ventured closer to the stones, their faces uplifted, their eyes glazed over. They moved with an unsettling grace, like puppets on invisible strings. "We have to get out of here," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. Something isn't right." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I wanted to run, to flee this place of creeping dread, but an unseen force held me rooted to the spot. The humming intensified, vibrating through the ground, through me. It was a siren's call, seductive and terrifying. We watched as the others reached the stones, their hands outstretched. They touched the rough, ancient surface, and as they did, the green light flared, engulfing them in an almost blinding glow. Their screams, muffled and distorted, echoed across the plain, quickly swallowed by the deepening hum. Then, silence. The light subsided, leaving an unsettling stillness in its wake. The stones stood silent sentinels, their glyphs still swirling, but now with a slower, more deliberate pace. The others were gone, vanished without a trace. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back, pulling Elena with me. We needed to leave, to escape this nightmare before it consumed us too. But as we turned to flee, a voice, ancient and chilling, echoed from the stones. It wasn't a human voice. It was a chorus of whispers, woven together into a single, chilling entity. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow, I knew its meaning. It was a greeting, a welcome, an invitation. The glyphs on the stones began to glow brighter, pulsing in time with the whispers. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the ground beneath our feet vibrated with increasing intensity. I felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards the stones, towards the source of the whispers. Elena screamed, clinging to me with renewed desperation. "Don't let it take you," she cried, her voice raw with terror. I fought against the pull, the insidious whispers burrowing into my mind, twisting my thoughts, clouding my reason. Images flashed before my eyes, visions of cosmic horrors, of ancient entities beyond human comprehension. I saw the Earth, a tiny blue marble suspended in the vastness of space, connected by lines of energy to other planets, other stars, other dimensions. I saw Stonehenge, a nexus point in this vast, cosmic web, a gateway to something else. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, promising power, knowledge, transcendence. They promised answers to the universe's deepest mysteries. They promised everything. I felt myself weakening, my resistance crumbling. The pull was too strong, the whispers too seductive. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the inevitable. Then, I felt Elena's hand tighten on mine. Her touch, warm and human, jolted me back to reality. I opened my eyes and saw the fear in her face, the desperation in her grip. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't give in. I couldn't abandon her. I couldn't abandon humanity. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled myself free of the whisper's grasp. I stumbled back, dragging Elena with me, away from the stones, away from the seductive hum, away from the promise of oblivion. We ran, blindly, desperately, across the desolate plain, the whispers chasing us, nipping at our heels. The ground trembled beneath us, threatening to swallow us whole. The green light from Stonehenge cast grotesque shadows that danced and writhed around us, like spectral predators. We didn't look back. We couldn't. We knew that if we did, we would be lost. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs ached, until we collapsed, exhausted and terrified, in the shadow of a small copse of trees. As we lay there, gasping for breath, the whispers faded, the humming subsided, and the ground stilled. The green light from Stonehenge, now a distant beacon in the encroaching darkness, seemed to dim, as if the ancient entity within had grown weary of its pursuit. But we knew it wasn't over. We knew the whispers would return. We knew the entity within Stonehenge was waiting. Waiting for us to falter. Waiting for us to return. And as the last vestiges of twilight faded, and the cold, unforgiving darkness of night descended upon us, we knew that our fight for survival had just begun. The whispers had planted a seed of doubt, a sliver of fascination, deep within our minds. And we knew, with a chilling certainty, that sooner or later, they would return to harvest what they had sown. What if Stonehenge was part of a global energy network? Part 24 of 25. The chanting had stopped. The thrumming, however, hadn't. It pulsed now, a sickening heartbeat against the ravaged landscape. The sky, a bruised purple streaked with sickly green, pulsed in time with it. We huddled together, the remnants of our team, myself, Anya, and the increasingly erratic Professor Armitage, pressed close against the fallen trilithon. The very air crackled with an unnatural energy, making my hair stand on end. The silence was worse than the chanting. It was a pregnant silence, the kind that precedes a scream. Anya clutched my arm, her knuckles white. Armitage, his eyes wide and unseeing, muttered something about completion, and the cycle renewed. From the center of the ravaged Stonehenge, where the altar stone once stood, a light began to grow. It wasn't a warm, inviting light, but a cold, sterile luminescence, like the glow of a surgical lamp in a darkened operating theater. It grew in intensity, pushing back the unnatural twilight, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed and danced around us. "It's drawing power," Anya whispered, her voice barely audible above the thrumming. From everywhere, I understood what she meant. Over the past weeks, we'd seen other sites like Stonehenge, Easter Island, the Nazca Lines, the Pyramids of Giza, all pulsating with the same unnatural energy. Each site had been activated, the stones vibrating with a force that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality. And now, Stonehenge, the central node, was drawing that power in, consolidating it, preparing for, what? The light intensified, becoming almost unbearable. We shielded our eyes, but it seemed to seep through our eyelids, painting the world in shades of stark, clinical white. Then, within the light, a shape began to coalesce. It was vaguely humanoid, impossibly tall, its outlines shimmering and indistinct. It radiated an aura of ancient, alien power, so immense that it pressed down on us, making it hard to breathe. Armitage, however, seemed invigorated. He stood, swaying slightly, a look of rapturous awe on his face. "The architects," he breathed, his voice filled with reverence. "They've returned." The figure within the light continued to solidify, its features slowly becoming discernible. It wasn't human, not really. Its head was elongated, its eyes large and black, devoid of pupils. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in hands with far too many fingers. It was beautiful in a terrifying, otherworldly way, like a nightmare given form. A wave of nausea swept over me. This was it, the end. Everything we had fought for, everything we had lost, had led to this. The return of something ancient and unknowable, something that viewed humanity as nothing more than fuel. The figure extended a hand, and the thrumming intensified. The ground beneath us trembled. Cracks appeared in the earth, spreading outwards like a spiderweb. The air shimmered and distorted, as if reality itself was beginning to unravel. Anya screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that was quickly swallowed by the all-encompassing thrum. I could feel the energy pulling at me, drawing me towards the light, towards the architect. It felt like every cell in my body was vibrating, about to explode. Armitage stepped forward, his arms outstretched, a look of ecstatic surrender on his face. "Embrace the cycle," he cried, his voice echoing across the shattered landscape. "Become one with the architects." He walked into the light, his body dissolving as he entered it, absorbed into the shimmering form of the architect. For a brief moment, I saw his face, twisted in a rictus of, was it pain? Or ecstasy? I couldn't tell. Then he was gone. The architect, now fully formed, turned its gaze towards Anya and me. Its black, Pupil-less eyes seemed to bore into us, stripping away our layers of defense, exposing our deepest fears. I knew, with chilling certainty, that we were next. But something unexpected happened. The architect hesitated. The thrumming faltered, the light flickered. The cracks in the earth stopped spreading. The very air seemed to hold its breath. For a fraction of a second, I saw something in those vast, black eyes. Not malice, not hunger, but confusion, and then, a voice, echoing in my mind, ancient and vast and filled with a chillingly familiar cadence. Not yet complete, asterisk. The light dimmed. The architect's form shimmered, becoming indistinct once more. The thrumming faded, replaced by an unnerving silence. The cracks in the earth seemed to seal themselves. The sky, still bruised and unnatural, began to lighten, the first hint of dawn painting the horizon a pale, sickly yellow. We were still alive, for now, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this wasn't over. The architects had returned, and they were waiting. The final countdown had begun. The humming grew louder, a bone-deep vibration that resonated not just in the air, but within us. The standing stones pulsed with sickly green light, veins of power crawling across their surfaces. Alina's hand, still clutching mine, was clammy and cold. We stood on the precipice, the chalky earth crumbling beneath our feet, staring into the swirling vortex of energy that had once been Stonehenge. It was no longer a monument, but a gaping maw, consuming the very fabric of reality. The sky, once a bruised purple, now boiled with unnatural colors, shades that shouldn't exist, that clawed at the edges of sanity. The air crackled with static, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. We were mere insects, caught in the eye of a cosmic hurricane. "It's too late," Elena whispered, her voice thin and reedy, barely audible over the growing roar. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, reflected the chaotic dance of light within the vortex. We should have listened. She meant the whispers, the warnings etched in forgotten languages on crumbling tablets, the desperate pleas of civilizations long gone. We had chased the truth, unearthed the secrets of the global energy network, only to find a horror beyond comprehension. Stonehenge, Easter Island, the Nazca Lines, the pyramids, all connected, all conduits for a power that humanity was never meant to wield. The ground began to tremble violently. Fissures snaked across the earth, spitting out plumes of noxious gas. The screams of the remaining soldiers, faint and distorted, carried on the wind. They were being swallowed, drawn into the vortex like moths to a flame. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This wasn't just the end of Stonehenge, it was the end of everything. I squeezed Alina's hand, trying to offer some comfort, though I felt none myself. We had come so far, only to witness the unraveling of the world. The humming reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that threatened to shatter our eardrums. The green light intensified, blinding, all-consuming. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But it didn't come. Instead, a new sound emerged, cutting through the cacophony. It was a low, guttural chanting, rhythmic and hypnotic. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, resonating within the very core of my being. I cautiously opened my eyes. The green light had subsided, replaced by a pulsating, ethereal blue. The vortex still swirled, but its chaotic energy seemed contained. Figures emerged from the swirling mist, their forms shimmering and indistinct. They were tall and slender, their limbs elongated and unnatural. They moved with an unnerving grace, their movements synchronized with the chanting. Elena gasped, her fingers digging into my hand. "The Guardians," she breathed, her voice filled with awe and terror. We had found references to the Guardians in our research, ancient depictions of beings who served as keepers of the energy network. Myth or reality, we hadn't been sure. Now, we knew. They were real, and they were here. The chanting intensified, and the vortex began to shrink, the chaotic energy receding like a tide. The Guardians continued their slow, deliberate dance, their movements weaving an invisible net around the receding energy. It was as if they were sealing a wound, patching a tear in the fabric of reality. As the vortex shrank, the unnatural colors in the sky began to fade, replaced by the familiar twilight hues. The ground stilled, the fissures closing as if they had never been there. The humming diminished, replaced by an almost unbearable silence. The Guardians remained, their ethereal forms shimmering in the fading light. They seemed to observe us, their presence both comforting and unsettling. They had saved us, saved the world, but from what? And at what cost? Then, one of the guardians turned towards us. Its face, if it could be called a face, was smooth and featureless, yet I felt its gaze upon me, probing, assessing. A wave of dizziness washed over me, a sensation of being pulled, stretched, examined down to the very core of my being. A voice, not heard, but felt, resonated within my mind. It was ancient, powerful, and filled with a sorrow that transcended human understanding. The balance is restored, for now. But the hunger remains. The gate has been opened, and it will not remain closed forever. Asterisk. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the guardians vanished, fading into the swirling mist. The silence that remained was heavy, pregnant with unspoken warnings. Elena and I stood there, hand in hand, amidst the shattered remnants of Stonehenge. The world had been saved, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge of what lay dormant beneath the surface. The gate had been opened, and the hunger remained. We had glimpsed the true nature of the universe, and it was a terrifying thing. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the broken stones. We were alone, two insignificant beings in a vast and indifferent cosmos, left to grapple with the chilling realization that the true horror wasn't what had happened, but what was yet to come. The silence stretched on, broken only by the whisper of the wind, a constant reminder of the unseen forces that lurked just beyond our comprehension. The silence, once a comfort, was now a terrifying symphony of the unknown, a prelude to a future we could only dread.